Welcome to Shahnameh, Book of Kings. Today we continue on with the 7 Trials of Rostam. At dawn one day, Rostam decided to go hunting to drive away the sadness he felt in his heart. Filling his quiver with arrows, he set off for the border to Tehran, and when he arrived in the marshes, he saw plains filled with wild asses. Laughing, his face flushed with pleasure, he urged Racksh forward. With his bow, his mace, and his noose, he brought down his prey, and then lit a fire of brushwood and dead branches. Next, he selected a tree and spitted one of the slaughtered asses on it. The spit was as light as a feather to him, and when the animal was roasted, he tore the meat apart and ate it, sucking the marrow from its bones. He sank back contentedly and slept. Cropping in the grass, his horse Racksh wandered off and was spotted by 7 or 8 Turkish horsemen. They galloped after Racksh and caught him and bore him off to the city, each of them claiming him as his own prize. Rostam woke from his sweet sleep and looked around for his horse. He was distressed not to see Racksh there, and set on foot toward the closest town, which was Samangan. To himself he said, "How can I escape such mortifying shame? What will our great warriors say? His horse was taken from him while he slept. Now I must wander wretched and sick at heart, and bear my armor as I do so. Perhaps I will find a trace of him, so I will go forward." The king of Samangan was told that the crown bestower, Rostam, had his horse Racksh stolen from him, and was approaching the town on foot. The king and his nobles welcomed him and inquired as to what had happened, and they stood ready to serve him in any way that they could. Rostam's suspicions were laid to rest, and he said, "In the pastures, Racksh was wandered off from me. He had no bridle or reins. His tracks come as far as Samangan, and then peter out into the reeds in the river. If you can find him, I shall be grateful. But if he remains lost, some of your nobility will lose their heads." The king responded, "No one would dare to have done this to you deliberately. Stay as my guest and calm yourself. Tonight we can drink and rejoice and drown our worries with wine. Racksh is such a world-renowned horse, he will not stay long lost." Mollified by his words, Rostam agreed to stay as the king's guest. He was given a chamber in the palace, and the king himself waited on him. The chieftains of the army and the city's nobility were summoned to the feast. Stewards brought wine, and dark-eyed, rosy-cheeked girls sought to calm Rostam's fretfulness with their music. After a while, Rostam became drunk, and felt that the time to sleep had come. His chamber had been sweetened with the scents of musk and rosewater, and he retired there for the night. When one watch of the night had passed, and Venus rose into the darkened sky, a sound of muffled whispering came to Rostam's ears. Gently his chamber door was pushed open. A slave entered, a scented candle in her hand, and an approach to the hero's pillow like a splendid sun, a paradise of tints and scents. Her mistress followed her. This beauty's eyebrows curved like an archer's bow, and her ringlets, well, they hung like nooses to snare the unwary. In stature she was as elegant as a cypress tree. Her mind and body were pure, and she seemed to not partake of earthly existence at all. The lion-hearted Rostam gazed at her in astonishment. He asked what her name was, and what it was she sought on so dark a night. She said, "My name is Tomina. Longing has torn my wretched life in two, though I was born the daughter of the king of Samangan and descended from a warrior clan. But my legend, I have heard the story of your heroic battles and your glory, of how you have no fear and face alone dragons and demons in the dark unknown, of how you sneak into Tehran at night and prowl the borders to provoke a fight, of how when warriors see your mace they quail and fear their lion hearts within them fail. I managed to catch a sight of you, to glimpse your martial chest and mighty face, and now God brings you to this lowly place. If you desire me, I am yours, and none shall see or hear of me from this day on. Desire destroys my mind. I long to bear within my woman's womb your son and heir. I promise you your horse if you agree. since all of Samangan must yield to me." When Rostam saw how lovely she was, and moreover heard that she promised to find Racksh for him, he felt that nothing but good could come of this encounter, and so in secret the two passed the long hours of night together. As the sun cast its noose in the eastern sky, Rostam gave Tamana a clasp which he wore on his upper arm, and said to her, "Take this, and if you should bear a daughter, braid her hair about it as an omen of good. However, if fortune brings you a son, have him wear it on his upper arm as a sign of who his father is. He'll be a boy like Sam, a son of Nariman, nobles and chivalrous, one who will bring down eagles from their cloudy heights, a man on whom the sun will not shine harshly." Then the king came to Rostam and asked how he had slept, and brought news that Racksh had been found. Rostam rushed out and stroked and petted his horse, overjoyed to have found him. He saddled him and rode on his way, content with the king's hospitality, and to have found his horse once again. 9 months passed, and the princess Tamana gave birth to a son, as splendid as the shining moon. He seemed another Rostam, San, or Nariman, and since his face shone bright with laughter, Tamana named him Sohrab, or bright-visaged. When a month had gone, he seemed a year old. At 3 he played polo, and at 5 he took up archery and practiced with the javelin. By the time he was 10, no one dared to compete with him, and he said to his mother, "Tell me truly now, why is it that I am so much taller than the other boys of my age? Whose child am I, and what should I answer when people ask about my father? If you keep all this hidden from me, I won't let you live a moment longer." His mother answered, "Hear what I have to say." And he told him that he was the son of the mammoth-bodied hero Rostam, and are descended from Dastan, Sam, and Nariman. This is why your head reaches to the heavens. Since the Creator made this world, there never has been such a knight as Rostam. Secretly, she showed him a letter from Rostam had sent her, together with 3 rubies set in gold. And then she said, "Afrazab must know nothing of this, and if Rostam hears of you and that you've grown, he'll summon you to his side and break your mother's heart." Sohrab answered, "This is not something to be kept secret. The world's chieftains tell tales of Rostam's prowess. How can he be right for me to hide from such a splendid lineage? I'll gather a boundless force of fighting Turks and drive Kavush from his throne. Then I'll eradicate all trace of tusks from Iran and give the royal mace and crown to Rostam. I'll place him on Kavush's throne. Next, I'll march on Tehran and fight with Afrazab and seize his throne too. If Rostam is my father, and I am his son, there no one else in all the world should wear the crown when the sun and the moon shine out in splendor. What should lesser stars do, boasting of their glory? From every quarter, swordsmen and chieftains flock to the youth." Afrazab was told that Sohrab had launched his boat upon the waters, and that although his mouth still smelled of mother's milk, his thoughts were all of swords and arrows. The informant said that he was threatening war against Kavush, that a mighty force had flocked to him, and that in his self-confidence he took no account of anyone. Afrazab laughed with delight. He chose 12,000 warriors, placed them under the command of Barman and Human, and addressed his 2 chieftains thus: "The secret must remain hidden. When these 2 face each other on the battlefield, Rostam will surely be at a disadvantage. The father must not know his son, because he will try to win him over, but knowing nothing, the ancient warrior, filled with years, will be slain by our young lion. Later you can deal with Sohrab and dispatch him to his endless sleep." Afrazab sent the 2 to Sohrab, and he entrusted them with a letter encouraging the young warrior in his ambitions and promising support. There was an army outpost of Iran called the White Fortress. Its keeper was an experienced warrior named Hijri. Sohrab, when Hijri saw that he was riding towards him, mounted his horse and rode out to confront him. Sohrab rode in front of the army, then drew his sword and taunted Hijri. What are you dreaming of, coming to fight alone against me? Who are you? What is your name and lineage? Your mother will weep over your corpse today." Hijri replied, "There are not many Turks who can match themselves against me. I am Hijri, the army's brave commander, and I shall tear your head off and send it to Kavush, the king of all the world. Your body I shall thrust beneath the dirt." Sohrab laughed to hear such talk. The two attacked each other furiously with lances. Hijri's lance struck at Sohrab's waist, but did no harm. But when Sohrab returned the blow, he sent Hijri sprawling from his saddle to the ground. Sohrab leaped down from his horse, intending to sever his enemy's head, but Hijri twisted away to the right and begged for quarter. Sohrab spared him, and in triumph preached submission to his captive. Then he had him bound and sent to Human. When those in the fortress realized that their leader had been captured, both men and women wailed aloud with grief, crying out, "Hijri is taken from us!" But one of those within the fortress was a woman, daughter of the warrior Gazdaham, named Gordefered. When she learned that their leader had allowed himself to be taken, she found his behavior so shameful that her rosy cheeks became as black as pitch with rage. With not a moment delay, she dressed herself in a knight's armor, gathered her hair beneath a roomy helmet, and rode out from the fortress, a lion eager for battle. She roared at the enemy's ranks, "Where are your heroes, your warriors, your tried and tested chieftains?" When Sohrab saw this new combatant, he laughed, and he bit his lip and said to himself, "Another victim has stepped into the hero's trap." Quickly, he donned his armor and a Chinese helmet and galloped out to face Gordefered. When she saw him, she took aim with her bow. No bird could escape her well-aimed arrows, and let loose a hail of arrows, weaving to the left and to the right as an experienced horseman as she did so. "Shame!" urged Sohrab forward, his shield held before his head to deflect her arrows. Seeing him approach, she laid aside her bow and snatched up a lance, and as her horse reared towards the clouds, she hurled it at her opponent. Sohrab wheeled round, and it hit his waist, and his armor was severed. Her armor was severed, but she unsheathed her sword and hacked at his lance, splitting it in two. Sohrab bore down on her again, and snatched her helmet from her head. Her hair streamed out, and her face shone like a splendid sun. He saw that his opponent was a woman, one whose hair was worthy of a diadem. He was amazed and said, "How is it that a woman should ride out from Persia's army and send the dust up from her horse's hoofs into the heavens?" He unhitched his lariat from the saddle and flung it, catching her by the waist, and said, "Don't try to escape from me now, my beauty. What do you mean by coming out to fight? I've never captured prey like you before, and I won't let you go in a hurry." Gordefered saw that she could only get away by a ruse of some kind, and showing her face to him, she said, "Oh, lion-hearted warrior, 2 armies are watching us, and if I let them see my face and hair, your troops will be very amused by the notion of your fighting with a mere girl. We better draw aside somewhere, that's what a wise man would do, so that you won't be a laughing stock before these 2 armies. Now our army, our wealth, our fortress, and the fortress commander will all be in your hands to do with you as they wish. I'll hand them over to you so that there's no need for you to pursue this war any further." As she spoke, her shining teeth and bright lips and heavenly face were like a paradise to Sohrab. No gardener ever grew so straight and tall as cypress as she seemed to be. Her eyes were liquid as a deer's. Her brows were 2 bent arrows, or 2 bent bows. You'd say her body was a bud about to blossom. Sohrab said, "Don't go back on your word. You've seen me on the battlefield. Don't think you'll be safe from me once you're behind the fortress walls again. They don't reach higher than the clouds, and my mace will bring them down if need be." Gordefered tugged at her horse's reins and wheeled round forward to the fortress. Sohrab rode beside her to the gates, which opened and let in the weary, wounded woman warrior. The defenders closed the gates, and the young and the old alike wept for Gordefered and Hidjeri. They said, "O brave lioness, we all grieve for you, but you fought well, and your ruse worked, and you brought no shame on your people." Then Gordefered laughed long and heartily, and climbed up on the fortress walls, and looked out over the army when she saw Sohrab perched on his saddle. She shouted down to him, "O king of all the Asian hordes, turn back, forget your fighting and your planned attack." She laughed, and then, more gently, almost sighed, "No Turk will bear away a Persian bride. I mean not that you should conquer me. Besides, you're not a Turk. I know your trace, your lineage from a far more splendid race. Put any of your heroes to the test, none has your massive arms and mighty chest. But news will spread that Turan's army's here, led by a stripling chief who knows no fear. Kavush will send for noble Rostam then, and neither you nor any of your men will live for long. I should be sad to see the lion destroy you, and turn now and flee. Don't trust your strength. Strength will not save your life. The fatted calf knows nothing of the knife." Hearing her, Sohrab felt a fool, realizing how easily he could have taken the fortress. He plundered the surrounding settlements and sulkily said, "It's too late for battle now, but when dawn comes, I'll raze this fortress walls, and its inhabitants will know the meaning of defeat." But that night, Gazdaham, Gordeferet's aged father, sent a letter to Kavush telling him of Sohrab's prowess, and secretly before dawn, most of the Persian troops evacuated the fortress, traveling towards Iran and safety. When the sun rose above the mountains, the Turks prepared to fight. Sohrab mounted his horse, couched his lance, and advanced on the fortress. But as he and his men reached the walls, they saw very few defenders. They pushed open the gates and saw within no preparations for battle. A straggle of soldiers came forward, begging for quarter. When King Kavush received Gazdahm's message, he was deeply troubled. He summoned his chieftains and put the matter before them. After he read the letter to his warrior lordsmen like Tas, Gudars, the son of Kesvad, Give, Gorgon, Bahram, and Farid, Kavush said, "According to Gazdaham, this is going to be a lengthy business. His letter has put all thoughts from my mind now. What should we do to remedy this situation? And who is there in Iran who can stand up to this new warrior? I'll agree that Give should go to Zabul and tell Rostam of the danger threatening Iran and the Persian throne." Kavush wrote to Rostam, praising his prowess and appealing to him, and said, "Gallop as quickly as wind-borne smoke, and take this letter to Rostam. Don't delay in Zabul. If you arrive at night, set off on the return journey the next morning. Tell Rostam that matters are urgent." Give took the letter and traveled quickly to Zabul, without resting along the way. Rostam came out with a contingent of his nobles to welcome him. Give and Rostam's group dismounted together, and Rostam questioned him closely about the king and events in Iran. After they had returned to Rostam's palace and rested a while, Give repeated what he had heard, handed over the letter, and gave him the news he could of Sohrab. When Rostam had listened to him and read the letter, he laughed aloud and said in astonishment, "So it seems that a second Sam is loose in the world. This would be no surprise if he were Persian, but from the Turks it's unprecedented. I myself have a son over there by the princess of Samangan, but he's still a boy and doesn't yet realize that war is the way to glory. I sent his mother gold and jewels, and she sent me back an answer saying that he'd soon be tall young fellow. His mouth still smells of mother's milk, and he drinks his wine, and no doubt he'll be a fighter soon enough. Now, you and I should rest for a day and moisten our dry lips with wine, and then we can make preparations for war. It's possible that fortune turned against us, but if not, this campaign will not prove difficult. When the sea's waves inundate the land, the fiercest fire won't stand alight for long. And when this young warrior sees my banner, his heart will know his revels are all ended. He won't be in such a hurry to fight any more. This is not something we should worry ourselves about." They sat to their wine, and forgetting all about the king, passed the night in idle chatter. The next morning Rostam woke with a hangover and called again for wine. This day, too, was passed in drinking, and no one thought about setting out on the journey to Kavush. And once again on the third day, Rostam ignored the king's summons and had wine brought. On the fourth day, Give bestirred himself and said, Kavush is a headstrong man and not at all intelligent. He's very upset about this business, and he can neither eat nor sleep properly. If we stay much longer here in Zabalestan, he will be extremely angry. Rostam replied, Don't worry about that. There's not a man alive who can meddle with me. He gave orders that Racksh should be saddled, and that the tucket for their depart should be sounded. Zabol's knights heard the trumpets, and armed and helmeted, they gathered about their leader in court in high spirits, and ready to serve him. But when they bowed before the king, he at first made them no answer, and then addressing Give, he burst out in fury. Who is Rostam that he should ignore me, that he should flout my orders in this way? Take him and string him up alive on the gallows, and never, never mention his name to me again. Give was horrified at Kavush's words, and remonstrated. You would treat Rostam in this way? The courtiers stared, struck dumb, as Kavush then roared at Tuss. Take both of them and hang them both! And wildly, as a fire that burns dry reeds, he sprang up from the throne. Tuss took Rostam by the arm to lead him from Kavush's presence, and the warriors there watched in wonder. But Rostam too burst out in fury, and addressed the king. Smother your rage! Each act of yours is more contemptible than every act before. You're not befit to be a king. It's Sohrab you should hang alive, but you're unable to. Tuss he sent sprawling with a single blow, then strode toward the door as to go, but turned back in his rage and said, I am the crown bestower, the renowned Rostam. When I am angry, who is Kavush? Who dares to threaten me? And who is Tuss? My helmet is my crown. Racksh is my throne, and I am slave to none but God alone. If Sohrab should attack, who will survive? No child or warrior will be left alive. In all I ran too late, and desperately you'll seek for some escape or remedy. This is your land where you reside and reign. Henceforth, you'll not see Rostam here ever again. The courtiers were deeply alarmed, since they regarded Rostam as a shepherd and themselves as his flock. They turned to Gudars and said, You must heal this breach. The king will listen to no one but you. Go to this crazy monarch and speak to him mildly and at length, and with good luck you'll be able to restore our fortunes again. Gudars went to Kavush and reminded him of Rostam's past service and of the threat that Sohrab was to Iran. And when he heard him out, Kavush repented of his anger and said to Gudars, Your words are just, and nothing becomes an old man's lip like wisdom. A king should be wise and cautious. Anger and impetuous behavior bring no good to anyone. Go to Rostam. Make him forget my outburst, and remind him of our friendship. Gudars and the army's chieftains were in search of Rostam. Finally they saw the dust raised by Racksh, and caught up with him. They passed the hero and said, You know that Kavush is a brainless fool, that he is subject to these outbursts of temper, that he erupts in rage, and is immediately sorrow, and swears to mend his ways. If you are furious with the king, the people of Iran are not at fault. Already he regrets his rage and bites back the hand in repentance. Rostam replied, I have no need of Kavush. My saddle's my throne, my helmet's my crown, the stout armor is my robe of state, and my heart's prepared for death. Why should I fear Kavush's rage? He's no more to me than a fistful of dirt. My mind is weary of all this. My heart is full, and I fear no one but God himself. Gudars replied, Iran and her chieftains in the army will see this in another way. They'll say that the great hero was afraid of the Turk, and then he sneaked away in fear. They'll say that if Rostam has fled, we should all flee. I saw the court in an uproar over Kavush's rage, but I also saw that stir that Sohrab has created. Don't turn your back on the king of Iran. Your name's renowned throughout the world. Don't dim its luster by this flight, and consider the army is hard-pressed. This is no time to abandon the throne and crown. Rostam stared at him and said, If there's any fear in my heart, I tear it from me now. Shamefaced, he rode back to the king's court, and when he entered, the king stood and asked his forgiveness for what had passed between them, saying, "Impetuous rage is part of my nature. We have to live as God has fashioned us. This new and unexpected enmity has made my heart grow faint as the new moon. I looked to you for help, and when you delayed your coming, I became angry. But seeing you affronted by my words, I regret what I have said." Rostam replied, "The world is yours. We are all your subjects. I have come to hear your orders." Kavush said, "Tonight we feast, tomorrow we fight." Entertained by the musicians and served by pale young slaves, the two then sat in their wine and drank till half the night had passed. And now, here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with many more tales. Until then, my friends,